people who are joining, it's really interesting for us who are panelists to actually know where you might be joining from. So if you don't mind revealing or outing yourselves, if you don't mind saying hi and what city you're, or not city, that you're calling from today, that would be really nice. Helps us kind of picture who's out there. I'm currently sitting in Barcelona to go first. Cool. Isidra's from Alicante. Cool. Madrid. Yeah, I guess we'll probably have a few people from Madrid. That's what, Georgina, you and Danny, are you both in Madrid at the moment?
Yep.
Yes.
Because the amazing thing about remote working, just like my sense of understanding of where human beings are, has just been disrupted so much. Hey, David, thanks for joining. So we're just waiting a couple of minutes because we know that especially humans are still biological beings and can't always get to Zoom calls exactly at the minute at the time when they start. So we just want to make sure that everyone has a chance to find their virtual seats before we get going. Hey, Eva from Zaragoza. Cool. Is anyone joining from outside Spain? Yeah, maybe not. No one from Germany or anything? Probably not. I guess you wouldn't have any reason necessarily to have heard of this event if you're not from Spain. But you never know. Welcome everyone who's joining. If you're one of the people who's recently joined, if you don't mind sending us a hi message on chat, it's really nice for us as speakers to know who's out there and maybe what city you're in. Cool. So I think maybe I can get started with just explaining what this event's about and the context, and then people can continue to join. They'll get here before Danny and Georgina get to their good content. So my name's Chris. I'm the head of technology for Thoughtworks Spain. I'm joined here this evening by Danny. He's a consultant developer in Thoughtworks. He tells me he's a storytelling enthusiast driven by XP practices, which is good because at Thoughtworks, that's something that we're really keen on in agile and extreme programming. And he's been focusing on improving software development through empowering communications. I guess appreciating that software is a human discipline. I guess this is the bit in your bio, Danny, that you intended a little bit of a troll. You tell me that you believe deploying on Fridays is actually okay, which is, yes. I know if anyone follows like software development threads on Twitter, that's a routine argument that comes up over and over again. Cool, welcome, Danny. We also have Georgina, who's a senior developer at Thoughtworks. She's been working on various products and tech, but for the last 2 years, her work is focused on building platform products and advocating for XP practices. So something in common with Danny there, and the importance of developer experience. Georgina believes that improving a developer team's day-to-day leads to a more inclusive workplace, and she hopes to help the industry adopt a similar mindset. So thanks both of you for coming along. For people who don't know what we might be doing here, we're going to talk a little bit about the latest edition of Thoughtworks Tech Radar. So what the Tech Radar is basically a democratic event that happens twice a year within Thoughtworks, where people across the globe nominate blips that surface technologies or practices or tools or frameworks that they are interested in at the moment. And they might be things that are kind of way out there and a little bit futuristic that they're kind of interested in maybe investigating, or they might be things that really they believe in this day and age should become the normal thing that every team gets involved in. So what happens is we have these little events in all our different offices across the globe, and we gather together blips, as we call them, so individual items on the tech radar. And then there's an editorial group in Thoughtworks called the Doppler Group that together with our CTO meets and works out what the themes are and what blips we actually want to publish. So twice a year we publish the tech radar, and that tells you kind of in a group generalized way what the collective of Thoughtworks, the 10,000 of us across the globe, are thinking of at the moment. So what we're doing now is we're, I guess, celebrating the October release, which is release number 25, I think, of the tech radar. And what Danny and Georgina are here tonight to help me do is to go over a couple of the blips on the radar that they feel most passionately about, and maybe fill them out a little bit, because if you've seen the tech radar, it's a website with a whole bunch of little dots for each blip, and that doesn't give too much room for huge amounts of subtlety or explanation. So what we really think is that a lot of things in software should be the starting point for a conversation. So we're going to use those blips as a starting point for a conversation and talk in a bit more depth about what some of the most important blips mean to us. So hopefully that's what you came for, because that's what we're about to do. Maho, do you mind dropping the link to the Thoughtworks Tech Radar in the chat, perhaps, just so that people who might be interested in finding it can do so?
Sure, I will.
Cool. So one thing before we just completely get going, I want to say is that we are running this webinar under Thoughtworks Event Code of Conduct, which was shared with you by mail if you registered. So this should be a safe place. So you've got comments, hopefully they'll be respectful, especially to human beings, but probably also to technologies. This is a nice approach to take. We won't tolerate discrimination, harassment, or violence, and we ask for your support to learn together and share as a community. I'm confident that's what you came here to do anyway, but we think it's responsible to just lay out what happens if there's some kind of antisocial event. The chat is open for you to add any comments or ideas or interact with each other. So you might want to make sure that if you're adding a chat message, you're doing it to everyone, because Zoom can encourage you accidentally to talk to just to the panelists. But if you have your own opinion about a tech that we talk about or an approach we talk about, you want to challenge us or ask us to consider something or to agree with us, please feel free to add your own comment. And there's a Q&A down the bottom. And if you want to add kind of an explicit question for Danny and Georgina and me to discuss, then feel free to do that, and I'll get to that and read it out. So feel free to put yourself into the conversation as much as you're comfortable with, and if you just want to watch, that's fine as well. Cool. So I might ask you, Georgina, to kick things off. I think you have the slide deck there.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. So one moment. Cool. So here we go. Welcome everyone to the 25th volume of the Tech Radar. As Chris mentioned, how this is produced and whatnot, we're going to talk about a couple of themes today and for blips, starting with one of the favorite themes for both me and Daniel. First one is Conway is still the law. And it's interesting because it has been around for some time. But Daniel, why is it still so relevant for us? Why we still bring it up?
Okay, cool. That's a great question. Thank you very much for that. Okay, why is it relevant? Before talking about why is it relevant, let's maybe get a refresher, right? Because we might be familiarized with Conway's law, but in case you're not, this is basically an idea that came out in the 60s by Melvin Conway. And what he basically was trying to explain was that organizations tend to produce designs that mimic the way that they are organized and the way that they communicate. Extrapolating this idea to the software world, we can basically say that the code or the product that you produce will mimic the team that produces it, right? Back in the day when this idea came out, it was taken more lightheartedly. It was kind of joked around with this premise. People didn't really pay attention to it until actually I think it was refuted by the Harvard Business School and everything. I don't have the details, but yeah, until some organizations started making studies and research to try and see if it was true. And till today, we can see that it actually behaves in that way. And there are plenty of examples that many of us have seen in our daily lives or in several organizations where we have worked in the past, where tightly knit group of people or group of developers produce tightly coupled blocks of code or something that resembles a monolithic approach. And distributed teams, like for example, in the case of, let's say, open software communities, right? They normally develop code that is more loosely coupled, things that are a bit more resilient and that interact in a different way, right? Like the structures that they provide communicate in the way that they communicated while they were building that.
I've heard it framed as if you are designing a compiler and you divide your team into 3 teams, you'll get a 3-pass compiler, kind of just naturally. Because I guess, you know, you pointed out in your bio, Danny, that like communicating between humans is very important. So I guess if you're going to technically integrate, you have to be able to speak to the other people to work out how you integrate. And if they're in your team, you can do it easily. And if they're in another team, maybe there's a little bit more distance there.
Indeed.
Yeah, sure. So Danny, for example, you've seen cases in your experience where Conway law has been used for the organization advantage, or it has been ignored with fatal results?
Okay, I've seen both. I've seen both of those.
Results sounds very bad.
Each with magnificent results. Okay, so in the sad side, yeah, I've seen how this law is maybe not even acknowledged, right? Because not everybody is familiar with it. But yeah, I've seen how groups of people that don't interact with each other, or that there are no clear lines of communication between, for example, teams of designers and teams of developers, create silos that at the end devote into a product that it doesn't work as expected, right? If you come to it as the point of view of the operator or the user, you're expected something, but the behavior you obtain, it's something that's not really what it should be there, right? And on the positive side of maybe using Conway's law to build the thing that you want to build in a certain way, I have also seen that because you can take what is known as, I don't know if this is actually true, but I've read about the inverse Conway approach, which basically means build your organization the way you want your software to be built, right? So you start from the point of view of having the product completed and it behaves in some way and it communicates in some structures, and then you build your team that way, right? Like for example, you want to have an application with a platform on the cloud and some analytics team, and some analytics involved. So then you build a team that encompasses people that can work with all of these technologies, and you establish clear ways of communication between them.
Mm-hmm. There's actually a recent example of some work we've done in Thoughtworks Spain, which is about data mesh, which is getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but where we wanted to create both a data platform and data product. And so we wanted the platform to be kind of reusable and generic. So rather than start with a single team who was both using the platform and providing it, we started from day one to try to have that separation, because we wanted to encourage the platform team to kind of document things well and create good interfaces, so that later on, when other people came to use the platform, they would find a proper separation there. So I think that inverse Conway maneuver, we do tend to use it quite a bit.
Yeah. It's interesting because in my experience, I experienced the impact of not taking into consideration Conway law in platform products, where I've seen, since organizations are now pushed to kind of build strong platforms, deployment platforms or data platforms, and they say, okay, if we build a platform to reflect how organization wants to work, then we're gonna make it like that. But in the end, if you ignore your structures and how organization is already right now, you're probably going to build up a product that is going to be thrown into trash, not to be too dramatic, but yes. So it is a big blind spot for all organizations, and it's good to not let this slide. And of course, as it says, there's no correct or non-correct organizational structure. It's just being aware of what is your organizational structure, and if you want to make a change, maybe change that and not a lower level or the product within it, in a sense.
I've got a question from the audience that I think might be worth addressing now, because it's a very continuation of what we're saying. Eva is asking, if we think about Conway's law, would you say that a dysfunctional organization cannot then produce good software? Like, and how does this relate to, say, digital transformation? Do you need to fix your organization before you can then fix your architecture, would you say?
I believe so, yes.
I know it's a big question, and that if any of us would answer it just like that, we would be very welcome people.
Sure.
But yeah,
I think, yeah, I don't know if you folks have any answer in mind, or you want to answer that. Perfect. So what comes to my mind is, again, talking about the whole platform example. So we talk about Eva, the digital transformation, and to be pushed into this digital transformation phase, we need high-performing teams, we need to deliver faster, we need to understand requirements faster and whatnot. So we need to build tools and technology that helps our stream-aligned teams, per team topologies, or our product teams deliver in a more agile way, let's say. So if you're not able to change those very structural points that will help you get there if you still communicate in a way that doesn't allow this. So if you don't have a product mindset, for example, as an organization, if you want to utilize data, for example, but don't have a data-driven decision process in your organization or whatnot, no matter what product you build, you're not going to get there. So a modern solution, let's say, does require that your developer experience, your developers work in an up-to-speed way as well. They're not going to be able to react to change as fast as the organization needs if they're working the way they worked 10 years ago, let's say. Yeah. It's not just about technology, it's about the communication with the organization, for example.
Yeah. I think some people say organizations get the software they deserve. So I think what I've seen sometimes is organizations say, well, our software's got problems. That's an important thing because we need the software to work, right? So we're going to rebuild it. But the problem was that the things that made the software bad in the first place were still present in the organization. And so they built a new version of the bad software. So I definitely don't want to ignore your advice, Georgina, where you kind of have to take into account the current state when you're doing something, because being too idealistic is a problem as well. But I think in the end, Eva, if you don't fix anything about the organization, technical improvements you try to make will probably only at best be temporary.
And I think this is exactly why you need to understand the current state, not to build a corresponding product, but to make the changes in a different place, not technology. And we're going to talk about this later on because we have a theme that's related. So perhaps we can move on to the first blip that's kind of correlated. And again, guess what? We're talking about platforms and why it's not, well, I think we can skip this one because I didn't change it. Sorry, folks. Okay, so I talked about the example of platforms before and how internal products tend to reflect the organizational structure and whatnot. What's really interesting about platform internal products and what Blip made it to the radar now since 2017, I think, we're now saying, okay, adopt platform engineering product teams. And I think the key word here is product. So treat your platform team or your platform product as another product you treat for the external customers, let's say. So this was introduced for, I think, assessment or trial in 2017, where DevOps philosophy was pushing and the cloud existence was pushing organizations to build like kind of centralized automated tools. But then the question is, who's taking care of those tools, who are taking care of these products that developers are using or non-tech folks are using within the organization. And what we saw was perhaps operations teams or Jira ticket-based teams that were very separated with the rest of the organization. Internal, let's say, SRE teams suddenly rebranding as platform teams. And the key component here that is missing is is that platform team producing results as a product? So for example, are you able to, do you know who your customers are? Do you know what they need? Are you able to maintain that solution? And all the same questions that come up and the problems we need to solve for a product for external customers, the same way we need to do for an internal product and a platform. So what we suggest now, and we say, yes, please adopt that, but please have a product mindset and treat your platform as any other product. Use concept from team topologies. Maybe it's not going to be, for example, the first thing that comes to mind is like a platform team probably is an enabler for a stream-aligned team, but then there are team topologies for the platform teams as well. So find the best way that works for the organization. Assign a technical product owner, someone that can take care of the big questions, and also treat the team, the capabilities diversely. In a sense, it's very often that we see platform teams only having folks with operational skills or infrastructure skills, and then, but we still need in this platform team sensible defaults that we use for in general in software engineering. Good practices that you use for another product, bring them into your platform work as well. So at least you get the most benefits from your platform product.
I just ask one quick clarifying question on behalf of the audience. You mentioned team topologies a couple of times, and I agree it's very relevant, but could you say like what you're talking about there, just for people in the audience who might not have heard of it?
Sure, yes. So team topologies is a way to structure your teams in an organization. And it has to do with, okay, how are you going to, let's say, separate your teams in terms of like how they communicate, where are the boundaries, what teams are producing certain capabilities, what teams are supporting those teams that are producing those capabilities. And that's why when we talk about enabling teams and stream-aligned teams, this is definitely definitions from team topologies. It's a way to structure the organization, let's say. But then I think I can send the link later, but there is a specific team topology for platform that has to do with the topology within the platform, let's say, domain in the organization. Yes.
Sounds like there's a whole like
whole world,
webinar we could do just on that. So yeah,
yes,
I put the link to the book in the chat if anyone's interested. I think it's quite. Have you read it, Danny? I think it's quite like approachable. It's recommended.
The truth is that once you understand the structure very well, you tend to want to apply it everywhere and say, okay, but this is golden, you know. So, but yeah, we can spend an hour just talking about this. So yeah.
All right, well, we'll put it in the queue maybe.
Perfect.
I have another question for you, Georgie, because I like the one that, I mean, the Chris question was very clarifying about team topologies. But I have one more focus on the platform engineering product team itself. Like, so which type of organization do you think would benefit from having one of these teams? Because maybe I have a really small organization, right? And I'm not dealing with big amount of data at my disposal. I don't have the leverage to pull this type of team. So what do you believe?
So for example, I've experienced a small platform 2-people team in a startup. So there's no literally like, you know, from what point onwards can I have a platform team? But if you do have a platform product and it becomes, you have to deal with having 100 teams as a customer, and this product is very important to how your stream-aligned teams deliver, then most probably those folks cannot maintain those products. They cannot build on top of them, and you would definitely benefit from a dedicated platform team. Now, if you're very lucky and you have a team, a small startup with a team of generalists, and they all know infrastructure and they can handle their own, let's say, stack, and they can build a small platform for the few services they have, maybe then it's okay if you don't have a dedicated platform team. But it will, at some point, I think the system will kind of push 1 or 2 people to work on that. So you might not call it a platform team, but some folks will do more work on platform than usual.
So it's almost Conway's law. If they become the people who do that work, they will become the platform. Whether or not you try to have a platform team, eventually the people who know how to change the Terraform will be the platform.
Completely, yes. What's interesting in big organizations, and I really like the whole concept of platform teams when I was in platform, is we talk about team topologies, and what team topologies brought was the whole concept of consider the cognitive load of your teams. And I want you to talk about it because one thing that's, and another reason why we need to talk about product teams when we talk about platform is it is another team with, again, some cognitive capacity, like at a level. So my question always was like, okay, we take care of the cognitive load of the product teams, and platform will reduce that and will enabling high performing teams. What about taking care of the enabling team? Like, what happens to the cognitive load of the platform team, you know?
Yeah.
So maybe you can give us why cognitive load is important. Like, why was I at what point was like, okay, man, we're taking on too much. Like, what's happening there?
You're watching for the cognitive load of your team, but who's watching for yours? Right? Who watches the watchers?
Yes, exactly.
It's the philosophy here. Okay, so yeah, cognitive load. Can you move to the next? Okay, cool. I see it now.
Yes.
So basically, this is a concept that has been in the air for a while now. It's been gaining prevalence as of lately because we have been seeing more and more the impact that this load has on the performance of a team. Basically, what it is in a simple definition, it will be the capability that you have to store things on your brain at a certain moment, right? It's the memory capability that you have at any given time. This we can split into 3 types of cognitive load, right? The first one we call intrinsic, which is things related to a fundamental problem or a fundamental space. For example, you need to know how to define the structure of a class in Java, right? You need to know how to create a method in certain programming language, right? So this is intrinsic load. These are things that you need in order to build the product, right? To build the technology. You also have extraneous loads, which is something that is on the way of you advancing, right? It's a distraction. It is, for example, how do I deploy this component by myself? What are the steps needed to configure this service, right? So these are things that you're holding on your memory that maybe you shouldn't, right? These are things that maybe should be automated, or there should be an easier or simpler way to achieve this, right? So these are most likely maintenance procedures or stuff like that, maybe stuff that is not properly documented, etc. And lately we have the germane loads, which is the most interesting one because it is where we have to deal with the business logic, right? The germane will be something like, how should this service interact with this other service? How should this API behave when being reached by this other endpoint or whatnot? So it's basically the knowledge of how to build the business value, right? So what we want to achieve in a big sense is to minimize the extraneous load, right? We want to try to get rid of it as much as possible. The intrinsic one is unavoidable, right? Because you have to build on this knowledge in order to progress. So you don't focus on the intrinsic one. You focus on limiting the extraneous one in order to have space for the germane, right? You have to get rid of things that distract the team from advancing and giving them this time and this capability for them to build the things that we want to build. Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, so I already understand this conceptually, like, and I already feel that, okay, let's say a team owns 3 products by month X, and then after a few months, suddenly they own 6 products, you know?
Yeah.
And this can be also like, I don't know, perhaps intrinsic knowledge, but still it feels like, wow, we're taking on too much. We can't maintain, we can't push new features. So I have a feeling that I'm taking, this is too much for the team. And of course, I guess some people were like, okay, let's just bring new folks to the team, you know, to handle this, which of course, I guess it's a very bad idea. But how do I convince my, I don't know, C-level executives or my managers say, okay, look, we cannot take up much more, or we need to improve our processes to deliver better.
Okay. I like it that you bring the point of how teams normally get more and more ownership and more responsibilities as time passes. And it's true, when maybe we're all familiar with that process, right? When a new team gets built, they are assigned a certain level of ownership or a certain amount of projects or products and whatnot. And it has been, it has been shown, and you can see it, that as time passes, this team, without having any changes, for example, assume that nothing changes within the team, you now own and are responsible for more projects, right? You started working on 2 products, and now you're owning 4 products, a half of a repo with another team, and then you have to maintain some legacy that other team left the company or whatever. And the blind spot here is assigning this type of responsibilities without thinking of the total amount of cognitive load that you have at your disposal, right? You're just thinking of capabilities on this on the aspect of developing code or whatnot, but you're not thinking on the load that you're putting into your team, right, in the cognitive side. So luckily, there are ways to measure this, right? We have come across an assessment by the Team Thoughtworks authors. They came up with a simple assessment of, I think it's less than 10 questions. And these questions, they assess things related to mostly developer experience, right? So they talk about what's their experience of building services, testing these services, deploying, operating them. So it's basically trying to gauge the experience of people working inside the company, right? And through that assessment, you can see if you have an adequate amount of load for certain teams or if you went overhead, right? And in order to act on that, you can restructure it. You say it's not about bringing more people. Maybe it's about distributing the load more accordingly, right? Maybe your main problem is that the deployment process is a pain, right? So you have to try to face that on some way.
Mm-hmm. Or like, I just wasn't sure if I should bring this up, but for me, sometimes even the whole PR code review process, taking a lot of time to a lot of people involved to get a feature in production is also like, I feel it's adding to the cognitive load as well. And it's very interesting because we see we can improve, let's say, we can improve the amount of cognitive load by improving a certain practices, as you say, and a certain processes in the team. But what about, I'm not sure if it's connected, what about the responsibilities of the capabilities the team needs to provide to the organization? Like, for example, you've mentioned a team having certain amount of products or software that they're responsible for. And is there a way that we can measure, okay, can I build more features, but also have the capacity to maintain old features? And is there a way that cognitive load describes that?
That's a great question and also a hard one because these things are measurable to some point, yeah, but it's also not easy. I mean, you cannot put a number on the capacity that someone has, right? You cannot put a clear indicator on the amount of cognitive load that someone may have. But what you can put indicators on are if you are meeting that limit or if you're going over it, right? You can also put indicators on what's part of the process being a pain. As you mentioned, maybe the code review and all the PR process is a mess. So what would you do in that case? Maybe you would implement pair programming or mobbing, right? This could take care of this side of the cognitive load that is messing with your team. Or maybe you could, maybe, I don't know, the way that your software is being built, you don't like it. It's painful. It's not the great interaction between teams. So maybe you adopt DDD and you take a new paradigm, you know, you take it with other optics. So yeah, there are ways to face it.
I think the interesting thing about measurement is I don't think it's something that people don't realize is happening. Yeah. Like, it's sometimes good to have measurement to know priority or to describe to someone who's a manager outside the team what's going on. But I'd be surprised if there was a team of people who thought, oh, we're handling fine, and then they looked at a cognitive load assessment and suddenly they were surprised, wow, we aren't managing. In the end, having a high trust environment, I think, obviates the need for some of the precision in measurement.
Yeah, I think the measurement process and assessment will help you identify what's probably unnecessarily increasing your cognitive loads. So at least you can focus on what matters, which is like delivering software and software that matters as well. So another thing that we want to talk about that I found a way to connect. It's a bit weird, but I see a lot of teams, before thinking of how to restructure their processes organization, they say, okay, what if we had this shiny new tool or this shiny new technology to help us solve this problem, for example? And not necessarily the problem of cognitive load, but perhaps they think that data solutions or deployment solutions that have more capacity or faster and whatnot will help them out, but in the end, not so much. So there's another theme that we want to bring here, and it's called clever tech we shouldn't need. So I think we all fall into this fallacy. We're believing that what we're missing is the next tool. What we're looking forward to is the next Kafka, the next Airflow, or whatnot. But in reality, we fail to do root cause analysis and see whether we're just taking a wrong course here. So not necessarily like complex solutions, not necessarily solve complex problems. Maybe they make it worse. There's an example about Airflow, for example, and a lot of the tooling ecosystem in data platforms is amazing. I can't say we shouldn't have that. We're very lucky to have this ecosystem and these powerful tools. But then again, we see in big data organizations, but we're talking about really big data organizations with that rely heavily on data, struggle to utilize this technology, and they just wish to, maybe in 2 years we'll have X, Y, Z, and maybe this will solve it for us. But in reality, maybe it's not about tools, maybe it's about how we're treating data in the organization, for example. And this is why we want to talk about data mesh today, that it falls under this theme. And it talks exactly about this, this issue. So data mesh is a hard kind of concept for me to clearly describe, because we are ourselves trying to figure out one very important thing. We understand its value, we understand the concepts, and here we are saying on the Tech Radar, let's trial it out. Let's see how are we going to implement a data mesh architecture. So to describe what is data mesh, probably if you haven't worked in a big data organization, it's very difficult to say, okay, why do I need that? But let's imagine ourselves in a sense, we are an organization where we have data for our applications that is historical. So we have data produced until today. And then there's an analytics part of the business utilizing this data for applying machine learning modeling and taking data-driven decisions and whatnot. And we say, okay, how are we going to bridge those worlds? Because we have producers of data and consumers of data that are separated and belong to different parts of the organization with different capabilities as well. So the answer to this problem was always, let's have a centralized approach. Let's bring everything, and this is a like abstract example from like very high above. Let's have a data platform, sources ingest data. It can be a data lake, it can be a data warehouse. You can have tons of Airflow pipelines there, whatever technical ecosystem you want, and then consumers to query this data. Depending if you have a data lake or a data warehouse, you have different kind of agreements. Maybe in the data lake concept, you have priori agreements, a consensus of how the data should look like. It's hard for producers to kind of to ingest them, but then it's easy for consumers to query. In a data warehouse kind of approach, maybe we say, okay, we don't care how the data looks, just put it in the S3 bucket, and we'll figure it out. But what happens here is there's a centralized point of friction and synchronization, and it's the data platform team and the data platform monolith. So anything has to be handled there, whether it's compliance, whether it's processing, whether it's cleanup of this data, and the tooling has to be built there. So because of this, we have very powerful tech to support it. But what data mesh is saying, what if we treated data where it was produced? What if we treated data as a product, and data as a product would stay on the domain that it was produced? So so the folks and the teams like the teams that own the apps that produce certain data, let's say, should also own and handle their own data products and provide this data that they produce in a, let's say, decentralized way to other consumers in the organization. So we should imagine everything more of as nodes in the mesh, let's say. But of course, and we should think about 4 pillars here. So data mesh says, think about data as a product. Data belongs to a domain. They should be data products that are self-sustainable, not the independent, deployable independently. And last but not least, everything compliance, security, let's say agreement between domains and data domains here is agreed from a federated governments. And the central platform now, because you still have a platform, a data platform, is responsible to have already these things in place and provide this infrastructure to the data teams, let's say, to the small product data teams, so they can build on top of that, but still always with a minimum level of compliance that the federated government has put. This is all very interesting and like, let's say, generalistic. And now the question is, okay, what does this data product unit look like underneath? And you know, what happens to the cognitive load of the data domain teams, for example, now?
Yeah. I was going to say, it sounds a lot like what you're describing is, if you take the data domain, which is kind of hot right now, it's important, and also it's kind of becoming more complex, and you apply those old lessons that we already talked about earlier about platform engineering product teams and watching out for cognitive load and respecting Conway's law, it sounds like you might get something quite a lot like data mesh if you applied all those lessons to the data domain.
And just to give some credit, I forgot to mention that the term was coined by Zhamak Dogani. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. And back in 2008, she worked in a lot of big data projects, and she was able to see, okay, like, we need to change this approach. We need to course correct. And it has been the concept in assessment for a couple of years now, I think, now in TechRadar. And now we're saying, okay, we've already done as Thoughtworks certain engagements with clients and POCs on data mesh. But the key here for us and from our experience is it's not a technological change. It is again, organizational change. It's a structural change. It's a domain-driven design approach. The tooling, the tech might be the same, but first we need to cover capabilities we're going to need and then see what kind of tech help us there.
Makes sense. I've put a link to Zhamak's article in the chat for people who want to read more.
Cool. So I'm very interested to see how this will evolve. I myself, before working in data platforms, I was not aware of why is this so important. And now experiencing the pain of like data engineers and the pain of organization, hiring data engineers, finding the right tools, mitigating, like calculating costs, seeing how they're going to scale out, in a sense, their data issues. I understand that, wow, this makes so much sense. And we all have, I have a lot of questions, and I'm looking forward to see how this will look like in a few years. I guess, Chris, if I'm not mistaken, probably the data mesh architecture will probably look like how microservice architecture looked like 10 years ago, for example.
It might. I think there's definitely that kind of, you end up with this repeating pattern in tech. If there's a big need and then something comes along that fulfills the need or addresses it, then maybe people get a little bit too excited about the thing because, you know, microservices is a good example of a useful technique that perhaps was really, really fashionable at a point in time. I think probably with all techniques and like trends, they go through that kind of hype curve.
But in a sense, what I was more referring to is that we're still trying to figure out how this will look like. Yeah. Like we didn't know what a good microservice was exactly, and how actual realistic application would look like. And then we saw that, oh, in some cases we didn't really need them, you know. So we really need to. We still have room to explore here. And
that's why, just to get a bit meta back to the radar. So I think George, you talked about how this is on trial. Part of how we work with the radar is we need to know some things that are stable, that just everybody should just do this, no discussion, right? So I guess platform engineering product teams, we think that the conversation, the argument is settled. That's how you should be doing things. If you're not, you probably better have a pretty good reason about why you're an exception. Data mesh is in that different ring of the radar, which is trial, because it's still, the conversation is ongoing. And like Georgina says, there are great things about it, but there's also like a lot of room for working out how it applies to different contexts and how it deals with different challenges.
And I have a question for you, Chris, maybe, because I know you've been in POCs of data mesh, I think. So my question is, okay, we're struggling to hire data engineering capabilities.
Sure.
And now we're asking domain teams to also improve on those capabilities and handle also data products.
So I think this is where like the cognitive load thing comes in, right? Because you might say, crap, are we just like being, you know, these teams already had a lot to do and now we're asking them to do one more thing, which is own their own data. And I think maybe the same answer that you were giving earlier about team cognitive load plugs in, which is better platform tooling. So I guess the nice thing is that over the last few years, the maturity of platform tooling has got a lot better, and also the maturity of how to organize platform teams with organization has got better. So my hope is that we don't make product teams' lives harder because, well, we add a little bit more responsibility for their data. We take away some cognitive load by giving them better platforms to work with.
Sure, yes. I guess it was also the same when we started talking about autonomous teams and teams handling their services and scaling the services and their infrastructure. And there's still a platform team there, but now we are more keen on having generalists on our team and whatnot. It's just one more thing we need to know about now.
Well, microservices and infrastructure is a great example, right? So when we started talking about microservices, we're like, okay, and teams should also know how to provision their own infrastructure. And some teams like, what the hell? I already need to know a million things. I need to know about like servers and networks and stuff. And while that was a bit of a strain, it really, microservices were enabled by cloud computing coming along and making the knowledge you needed to have to manage your own infrastructure smaller. So the trouble is, I guess, like the great dismal quote is that the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. I think there are the tools to make this work, but that doesn't always help the individual developer who's the one who is like struggling in their team with the cognitive load on a given day. I understand that, but I hope that over time, the improved platform and tooling around data will make data mesh more and more feasible as an approach.
Sure, yes. Cool. So talking about architectures, we have one more blip that neither of us were very sure about, but we're very excited, and it has to do with security. Danny, I don't know if you want to talk about what is zero trust architecture without me understanding from the title more or less, but how would you give it to us? How would you describe it to us?
Great question. Okay. Okay. So go from the base of it. This is a paradigm on security architecture that was trialing since last year and now has made the jump to adoption in only a year. I believe that this is because of the resurgence of distributed teams and all of the remote working. Enterprises have changed their mindset regarding security, right? So zero trust architecture is basically a different approach to that. The traditional approach to security that some enterprises had, you can imagine it being like a castle and a moat, right? So everything inside the castle is secure. This is your premises, your network, everything. You have the moat around it, which would be your segmentation, firewalls, and whatnot, everything authenticated inside. And you had a bridge through which you let people inside, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So the thing with this approach is that it's very prone to data leaks and to basically external aggressors. Because the point of security is just consisting of one access point, and once you breach that, you're already inside, right? Once you breach the barrier, you're inside. You have access to everything.
It also an example of that. Like, how would that look like?
how would that look like? I don't know. It's basically, I don't think I have worked with a lot of security in the past, but let's assume that everything that you work on your current project is interconnected by, I don't know, everything is on AWS, right? So you have there your premises and your database and whatnot. And the only layer of exposure that you have, the only authentication that you have is VPN, right? So what you're exposing to the outside is an IP address, and anything that is not inside that subnet for you is not part of your business, and anything that has a subnet is your business, right? So if the attacker can assume, can intercept your network in any way, maybe he goes and tag alongs with some employees, right? He goes and he duplicates the access card and he's inside your Wi-Fi, or he just goes to your premises and pulls out the hard disk, right? So he already has this information. So this is how it used to look like.
We've got a chat. I've got a comment from Eva on the chat, which I think is good. She's saying it's like running an exploit and then your root, and now you own the place and you can just jump system to system because there's no protection.
Great point.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly.
By the way, I'm old enough to have worked on systems before I worked for Thoughtworks, where basically it was a private data center, and the attitude was, well, anything in this data center is owned by us, so what's the problem? You don't need to authenticate to add rows to this database or call this API because we're all friends here, right? Yes. And I think the point is that, especially on a cloud environment where there's all sorts of people, but just the modern security situation in general, we're all friends here is not a security posture.
Yeah, very sensible approach. Okay, so what Zero Trust Architecture, or CTA, proposes is basically to diminish this barrier, right? Have the barrier as close as possible to the device, and to trust nothing. You have to basically take it as if the attacker is already inside the network, and you need to not trust him, right? You need to not give him the access to the things that he wants to exploit. How do I do this? Okay, so basically, it should be relying upon certain pillars, right? One of those would be, for example, using a single authentication source, for example, SSO, right? You go through this first step to access your devices. The second layer would be to prove the authentication by a multiple factor authentication, right? So maybe you'll send a push event or a notification to another device that the employee has under his or her command. Then you distribute your policies using the least privilege principles, which basically mean to give everyone the less amount of permissions needed for them to carry out their work, right? Like, for example, you wouldn't give the office manager person access to execute PowerShell on your database, right? Why? Because basically they don't need that. You wouldn't also give that to engineers unless they need that for a certain activity that should last a certain amount of time, right? So it's basically a role-based policy distributed in the least amount of privilege possible. And also one of the most important pillars would be to record and log every activity inside your network in order to discover intrusion as fast as possible, right? Because you are already taking it as the intruder is already inside, so you have to discover it as fast as possible. Yes,
just
Chris?
a comment about the intruder already being inside. I think the sad truth of recent attacks has shown is that, well, actually, the developer might be the intruder. We're talking about systems that are valuable enough that there can be insider attacks. That's a thing that happens. And even if the developer isn't the person who's compromised, we've seen supply chain attacks where, the script gets dropped in libraries that developers might run on their machine. So, even if the developer themselves is a perfectly good and honest person, the code running on the machine might not always be. So, maybe we've met the enemy, and sometimes the enemy might be us as developers. And certainly if there's enough there's enough money, there's enough human toil on the line, we shouldn't be in a position where any security breach anywhere in the human part of the organization could cause everything to fall over.
Yeah, and actually we have seen examples like the one you mentioned, where it's not something logical that you're trying to attain, right? But for example, the tools that you're using may be exposing data to levels that you are not aware of. For example, Postman, if I remember correctly, if you had an account, it already stored on the cloud the petitions that you already had stored in the API collection. So maybe if you are using some sort of authentication key in that API, you're already exposing that. So it's an example.
And certainly, exposing things like AWS keys or whatever, there's enough kind of automated detection of slip-ups like that, people can have a Bitcoin miner up and running on your account in a very short space of time. I guess, in some sense, you could say that's an improvement in platform capabilities, but of the black hat kind.
Amazing.
Sure.
Okay, so the approach that I was talking about, it's labeled as a micro perimeter. It has been changed from a huge perimeter to a micro one. And I don't know a lot about this, but I know it gets achieved through micro segmentations, which is basically a set of segmentation rules and access levels, right? So you segment access level in a distributed way. So if people access it, they only have a certain amount of powers, as to say, a certain amount of deep level of power in the permission side. In order to implement zero trust architecture, since it's not a night and day type of thing, right? It's more of a philosophy than an architecture itself. What I've seen that is being envisioned is that enterprises are more likely to adopt a hybrid type of approach, right? Because they will still maintain some of the practices that they had in the past while implementing some of the practices from zero trust architecture. And in order to do that, the first step that you might need to do is to refine your resources, right? You have to take a look at what you have and what needs to be secured. You should also map all the flows that you have between your different devices and premises and whatnot. Then you start creating the policies, right? And to establish what type of right you need to access each of these devices. And lastly, it's all about monitoring, and logging. So just continue to monitor the microperimeter and try to cut the attacker as soon as possible, assuming that he is already inside.
Cool. Very interesting. And I'm glad that we again emphasize that it's a paradigm and an approach. So then how it's going to look like, it's up to the organization. There are ways, but of course it's a mindset.
Indeed.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. I think anything more on ZTA? No. Cool.
I have nothing more on ZTA.
We can leave some time.
Don't trust it.
Okay, don't trust it. Nice. Good to know. Cool. Then thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop sharing now. And if there are any questions, I guess.
Yeah, any other questions? Feel free to chuck them on the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll get to them. While people are maybe thinking of what questions they might ask, I'll just point out that we'll send a link to a feedback form, which we'll very much value if you filled out, and also a recording later on. So if you want to share this wonderful session with anyone of your friends who you think would benefit who didn't come, you'll be able to do that.
Yeah, sounds good.
I think we're getting thanks in the chat, but not any more questions just yet.
Cool. I think we questioned and answered ourselves already. It's like,
yeah.
So probably people are like, okay, you covered us. But nonetheless, we'll be happy to chat anytime. You can write to any of us three, and if there's anything more interesting that you want to talk about more. And let's see what the future Tech Reader holds.
Cool. Right. Thanks for everyone for coming, both people who are colleagues of ours and people who aren't colleagues of ours. The reason why we get into this business is we really like talking about and sharing ideas. So thanks. We appreciate your attendance and your questions and interaction. So I hope everyone has a really awesome evening, and hopefully see you in 6 months, if not earlier, at the next one of these events.
Perfect. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye.